The question of what it means to exist has been asked by many minds for a very long time. It is a simple question that hides deep mystery. The question asks what it is to be, why anything is at all, and what purpose, if any, lies behind being. It is a question that can be asked by a child, by a scientist, by a poet, by a monk. It can be asked in a quiet garden, in a bustling market, in a stone hall where ideas clash. The answer is never simple, but the search for an answer has shaped whole traditions of thought. In ancient Greece, a man named Socrates began to ask people to look at their lives and ask why they live. He would stand in the agora, the public square, and ask strangers what they thought was the point of living. One story tells how a young merchant stopped his cart to listen. Socrates asked, "What is the good life?" The merchant answered that it was to make money and keep his family safe. Socrates replied, "If you do not know why you do what you do, then you are like a ship without a rudder." That short exchange shows how the Greeks first turned the question of existence into a public conversation. A few centuries later, on the other side of the world, a teacher named Buddha asked a similar question. He sat under a tree and watched a leaf fall. He told his followers, "All things that are born will die. All things that are made will fall apart." He added, "If you see that everything changes, you will understand why you are here." The Buddha's answer was not about a purpose given by a god, but about seeing the pattern of change and letting go of desire. He said, "All conditioned things are impermanent." That line, spoken in simple language, points to a view of existence as a flow, not a fixed state. Both Socrates and Buddha used everyday life to illustrate their ideas. They did not hide behind complex words. They used the market, the tree, the river, the family. That method makes the question of existence feel close to anyone who lives a daily life. A modern child may ask, "Why am I here?" The child may be looking at the sky, at the birds, at the toys scattered on the floor. The child's question is a mirror of the ancient question. The child does not yet have a theory of the universe, but the wonder is the same. The child may be told, "You are here because your parents love you." That answer gives a personal reason. It also raises more questions. Why do parents love? Why does love exist? The child's question can lead to a deeper look at what it means to be a person, to feel, to think. A plant growing toward light offers another simple example. The plant does not think about why it exists. It simply bends its leaves toward the sun, stretches its roots into the soil, and makes food from light. The plant's existence is shown in its actions. It does not ask for a purpose. It follows a pattern that keeps it alive. The plant's pattern can be compared to a person's search for meaning. Some think that, like the plant, a human being simply follows a natural pattern, and that any meaning is added later by the mind. One way to think about existence is to ask whether it is a random accident. Some people say that the universe began with a big burst of energy, and that matter formed by chance. In that view, life is a rare accident that happened when conditions were just right. The argument says, if there is no plan, then there is no purpose. We are here because random events lined up. This view can feel cold, but it also frees a person from the need to find a hidden plan. It says that meaning can be made by each person, not given from outside. Another common argument says that meaning must come from outside the self. This view is often linked to religion. It says that a god or a higher power set the rules, gave a purpose, and watches over the world. The claim is, without a higher source, nothing can be truly good or bad. The argument points to moral codes, to the feeling that some things feel right and others feel wrong, as evidence that there is a source beyond human minds. It also offers comfort, because it says that each life is part of a larger story. Both of these counter-arguments have been answered many times. The random accident view meets the response that even if the start was random, the pattern that follows can still be meaningful. A river does not choose to flow, but people can choose to build bridges over it, to fish in it, to protect it. The existence of the river is still real, and its flow can still be part of a larger picture. The outside source view meets the response that many people find meaning within themselves, in love, in art, in work. They do not need a voice from beyond to feel that their life matters. Real-world applications of the question, "What does it exist mean?" can be seen in many fields. In medicine, doctors ask why a disease appears, and they look for causes that can be treated. In law, judges ask why a law exists, and they interpret its purpose. In education, teachers ask why a subject is taught, and they decide what skills are needed for the future. In each case, the question of purpose guides actions. In modern philosophy, the question has taken new shapes. Some thinkers talk about existentialism, a view that says each person must create their own meaning. They often quote the French writer who said, "Existence precedes essence." That line means that a person first exists, then decides what they will be. Others speak of phenomenology, a study of how things appear to us. They say that to know what exists, we must look at how we experience it. Both ideas try to keep the question alive in everyday life. An analogy can help. Imagine a book that lies on a table. The book has pages, ink, a cover. It exists as a physical object, but it also exists as a story that can be read. If no one opens it, the story stays hidden. The book's existence is both its material form and the ideas inside. In the same way, a human being exists as a body of cells, but also as thoughts, feelings, and actions. The question of meaning asks what part of that existence matters most. A second analogy uses a puzzle. A puzzle has many pieces. Each piece on its own does not show the picture. When the pieces are put together, a picture appears. The puzzle pieces exist before they are placed, but the picture only exists when they are arranged. Some say that life is like the puzzle pieces. The pieces are born, they grow, they meet other pieces. The picture is the meaning we make by connecting them. Historical anecdotes bring the question to life. In the ancient Greek agora, a philosopher named Diogenes walked around with a lantern in daylight, saying he was looking for an honest man. One day he stopped a politician and asked, "Do you know why you exist?" The politician laughed, then said, "I exist to serve the city." Diogenes replied, "If you serve only the city, you serve only what the city tells you. Who decides the city's purpose?" The story shows how a simple question can shake a powerful mind. In the Middle Ages, a monk named Brother Anselm kept a journal in a remote monastery. He wrote, "Today I watched the sunrise over the hills. The light touched the stone walls, and I felt a deep calm. I asked myself, do I exist for God, or does God exist for my love? I cannot answer, but I feel the question is a prayer itself." The entry shows how the question of existence can be a quiet prayer, a personal meditation, not just a public debate. Quotes from primary sources add weight. Socrates, as recorded by Plato, said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That line tells that looking at one's own existence is essential. Buddha, in the Dhammapada, wrote, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." That line points to the mind's role in shaping what it means to be. A modern writer, Albert Camus, wrote, "The only real philosophical problem is suicide." He meant that the question of whether life is worth living is at the heart of existence. These quotes, spoken in simple words, still echo today. The question also appears in science. Physicists ask, why does the universe have laws? They study why particles behave the way they do. Their work shows that the world follows patterns that can be described by math. Yet the patterns do not answer why the patterns exist. The gap leaves space for philosophy. A biologist may study why a species survives, but the deeper question of why life itself began remains open. In everyday life, the question can guide choices. A student may ask, why should I study math? The answer may be that math helps solve problems, that it builds a way of thinking, that it opens doors to jobs. The student then decides whether that purpose matches personal goals. A worker may ask, why do I go to work each day? The answer may be to earn money, to help others, to feel useful. The worker can then see how that purpose fits a larger story of self. The question also appears in art. A painter may ask, why do I paint? The answer may be to capture beauty, to share feeling, to leave a mark. The painting then becomes a sign of the painter's existence. A musician may ask, why do I play? The answer may be to express emotion, to bring people together, to create something that lasts beyond a single moment. The music becomes a way to show that the musician existed. Modern interpretations often mix old ideas with new tools. Some thinkers use computer simulations to ask, if we create a virtual world, does that world exist? They point out that a video game has characters, rules, and a story. The characters do not feel, but the players feel for them. The question becomes, does the existence of a story depend on the mind that watches it? The answer can help understand how human minds give meaning to the world. Another modern view looks at the brain. Neuroscientists study how the brain builds a sense of self. They find that the brain constantly creates a story about who we are. The story is a model that helps us act. In that view, existence is a brain's trick to stay alive. The brain tells us, I am a person, and that helps us survive. The brain's story can be changed, which means the sense of meaning can be changed too. The question of existence also matters in ethics. If one believes that life has a fixed purpose given by a higher power, then certain actions may be seen as right or wrong, because they follow that purpose. If one believes that meaning is created by each person, then ethics may be based on what each person decides is good. The debate shapes laws, rights, and social norms. In everyday conversation, people often use simple phrases that touch the big question. When someone says, I feel alive, they are noting a moment when they sense their existence strongly. When someone says, I feel lost, they are noticing a lack of direction, a feeling that they do not know why they are here. Those phrases show that the question lives in daily language. The search for an answer can be calming. Knowing that the question has been asked for millennia can make a person feel part of a long conversation. It can also be unsettling, because no single answer fits all. The calm voice of the narrator can remind the listener that the question is a tool, not a trap. It can be used to explore, to grow, to connect. In the end, the question, what does it mean to exist, invites each person to look at their own life, at the world around them, at the world around them, at the stories they hear, and at the ideas they read. It asks for a look at the simple things: a child's wonder, a plant's reach, a market debate, a monk's journal. It asks for a look at the big ideas: random chance, outside purpose, personal creation. It asks for a look at the real world: medicine, law, education. It asks for a look at the modern world: computers, brains, art. All of these pieces together form a picture that can guide a life. The calm voice can close by saying that the question does not need a final answer. It needs a steady look, a gentle curiosity, a willingness to ask again. It needs the willingness to hear the ancient words, the modern words, the quiet words of a child, the quiet words of a plant. It needs the willingness to see that existence is both a fact and a story. In that space, meaning can be found, created, and shared. The story of the mind-body puzzle begins long before the modern lab. Ancient thinkers already felt a tug between what is thought and what is felt. In early Greece, Plato claimed that the soul lives in a realm of ideas that is separate from the physical world. He imagined the soul as a traveler that visits the body only for a short time. Aristotle pushed back. He said the soul is the first actuality of a living thing, meaning it is what makes a body alive. He did not picture the soul as a ghost that floats above the flesh. These early ideas set the stage for a debate that still runs today. The next big voice in the puzzle was René Descartes, a French philosopher of the 1600s. Descartes wrote, "I think, therefore I am." He used that sentence to show that thinking is the one thing that cannot be doubted. For Descartes, the mind is a thinking thing that does not take up space. The body, on the other hand, is a material thing that does take up space. He called this view dualism, because it splits reality into two kinds of substance, mental and physical. In his own words, the mind is better known than the body, for we know more clearly what we are than what we are made of. Descartes believed that the two parts talk to each other through a tiny spot in the brain called the pineal gland. He could not see the pineal gland, but he imagined it as a bridge. Descartes' ideas spread quickly. Many scholars liked the clean split. It seemed to match everyday experience. When a person feels a sharp headache after a stressful exam, the pain feels like a signal from the body, but the worry that caused it feels like a thought. The two feel linked, yet distinct. Another everyday case is the sensation of falling in a dream. The body is lying still in a bed, but the mind creates a vivid feeling of dropping. The mind can paint a scene that the body does not share. These moments make the split feel real. The puzzle also entered the scientific world. In the 17th century, a heated debate erupted over whether animals have souls. Some argued that only humans have a mind that can reason, because only humans can speak and think about abstract ideas. Others, like the Dutch physician Jan Swammerdam, dissected insects and found that their nervous systems looked much like those of humans. He claimed that animals could feel and think in ways similar to people. The debate forced philosophers to ask, if a mind can exist without a body, could a body exist without a mind? The animal soul argument showed that the mind-body question is not just about people, but about all living things. A later story brings the puzzle into the modern laboratory. In the early 20th century, A railroad worker named Phineas Gage suffered a severe brain injury when an iron rod burst through his skull. The rod missed his brain's outer layer, but damaged the front part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. After the accident, Gage's friends reported a striking change. He could still speak and move, but his personality shifted. He became impulsive, rude, and unable to plan ahead. Doctors wrote, "The same man is no longer the same." Gage's case suggested that a change in the brain can alter the mind. It gave scientists a concrete example that the mind may depend on the brain's physical state. From these stories, two main camps have formed. The first camp says the mind is nothing more than brain chemistry. In this view, thoughts, feelings, and consciousness are the result of neurons firing, chemicals being released, and electrical patterns spreading across the brain. When a person feels a headache after an exam, the stress triggers hormones like cortisol, which then cause blood vessels to expand, creating pain. The feeling of falling in a dream is linked to activity in the brain's visual and balance centers, even though the body stays still. Proponents of this view point to modern brain scans that show specific areas lighting up when people think about math, remember a song, or feel love. They argue that if a brain region is damaged, the corresponding mental ability fades, as in Gage's case. They quote the neuroscientist Francis Crick, who said, "You, your brain, and your mind are one." The second camp holds that the mind exists beyond the brain. Supporters of this view point to experiences that seem hard to reduce to chemistry. For example, many people report a sense of self that persists even when the brain is altered by drugs or injury. Some claim that near-death experiences feel like a glimpse of something that does not belong to the body. Others point to the fact that thoughts can be about things that are not present, such as imagining a distant planet or recalling a childhood memory. They argue that the mind can represent ideas that have no direct counterpart in the brain's hardware. They often quote Descartes, who wrote, "The mind is a thinking thing, distinct from the body, and not subject to its laws." Modern philosophers who lean this way sometimes use the term non-reductive to say that the mind cannot be fully explained by breaking it down into brain parts. Both camps have strong counter-arguments. The brain chemistry camp faces the challenge that some mental events seem to have no clear physical cause. When a person has a sudden insight, a flash of creativity, or a feeling of awe while looking at a starry sky, it is hard to point to a single neuron that caused it. Critics say that the brain-only view can become a black box that labels everything as chemistry without explaining why the experience feels special. They also note that many brain studies rely on correlation, not proof that one thing causes another. The mind beyond body camp meets its own obstacles. If the mind can exist apart from the brain, how does it interact with the brain? The old idea of the pineal gland as a bridge does not hold up under modern anatomy. Critics ask how a non-physical mind could send signals to neurons without breaking the known laws of physics. They also point out that brain injuries, like the case of a stroke that wipes out language ability, show that losing brain tissue can erase parts of the mind. If the mind were separate, why would damage to the brain erase thoughts? Real-world applications of the puzzle appear in medicine, law, and everyday life. Doctors treat chronic pain by addressing both the body and the mind. They might prescribe medication to calm nerve activity, while also using therapy to change the patient's thoughts about the pain. This dual approach reflects the idea that thoughts can influence bodily sensations. In the courtroom, Judges sometimes consider a defendant's mental state when deciding guilt. If the mind is seen as a product of brain chemistry, then a brain injury could be a mitigating factor. If the mind is viewed as a separate moral agent, then personal responsibility might be judged differently. Even in education, teachers notice that stress can hurt memory. A student who worries before a test may find it harder to recall facts, showing how mental states affect brain performance. Modern neuroscience offers new tools to explore the puzzle. Functional MRI machines can watch blood flow in the brain while a person solves a puzzle or feels fear. These images show that different mental tasks light up different regions. Some scientists argue that this pattern supports the brain chemistry view. Others say that the patterns simply map where the mind's activity shows up without proving that the mind is made of those patterns. New fields like embodied cognition suggest that the mind is not only in the brain, but also shaped by the body's movements and the environment. For instance, holding a warm cup can make a person feel more friendly, showing that bodily sensations feed into mental judgments. This idea blurs the line between mind and body, offering a middle path. Analogies help to picture the puzzle. One common picture is the computer. The hardware, the chips, wires, and screen represents the body. The software, the programs, files, and user interface represents the mind. The software runs on the hardware, but the two are not the same thing. When a computer crashes, the software may become corrupted, yet the hardware can still be intact. Conversely, if the hardware is damaged, the software cannot run. This analogy shows how the mind might depend on the body while still having its own character. Another simple analogy is a puppet and its strings. The puppet's movements are visible, but the strings hidden behind the stage pull it. The strings could be thought of as the brain, while the puppet's personality is the mind. The audience sees the puppet act, yet the control comes from unseen forces. Historical anecdotes add color to the discussion. In 1660, a French physician named Pierre-Jean Gassendi argued that animals do have souls. He performed experiments where he placed a dog in a dark room and observed that the dog could still navigate by sound. Gassendi wrote, "If the animal can act without sight, its soul must be able to work without the eyes." This challenged the dominant view that only humans possessed a mind capable of thought. The debate forced philosophers to refine what counts as a mind. Another anecdote comes from the 20th century, when a patient known as Ham had parts of his hippocampus surgically removed to treat severe epilepsy. After the surgery, HM could no longer form new memories, though he could still recall events from his childhood. Researchers concluded that the brain region removed was essential for making new memories. This case showed that specific mental abilities are tied to particular brain structures, lending weight to the brain chemistry side. Quotes from primary sources keep the discussion grounded. Descartes famously wrote, "I think, therefore I am," to claim that the act of thinking proves the existence of a mind. Later, the philosopher David Hume, who lived in the 1700s, said, "The mind is a bundle of perceptions." He meant that what we call the mind is just a collection of feelings, thoughts, and sensations that flow together. Hume's words push the idea that the mind does not have a separate substance, but is simply what the brain experiences. In modern times, the neuroscientist Oliver Sacks observed, "The brain is a story-telling organ." He meant that the brain constantly creates narratives to make sense of the world, showing how thoughts arise from brain activity. The puzzle also appears in everyday choices. When a runner feels a runner's high, the body releases chemicals like endorphins, But the runner also feels a mental lift, a sense of joy. The runner may attribute the feeling to the mind's triumph, yet the chemistry is a key part of it. In another simple case, a person who practices meditation may notice that thoughts become quieter. The practice trains attention, which changes brain patterns. The person may feel that the mind has become separate from the noisy chatter, but the brain's activity has shifted. These examples illustrate how the mind and body can be linked in ways that feel both separate and intertwined. Modern philosophers continue to refine the debate. Some adopt a view called property dualism. They say that the brain has physical properties like mass and shape, while the mind has properties like experience and intentionality that cannot be measured in the same way. They argue that both sets of properties belong to the same thing, the brain, but are different kinds of description. Others prefer physicalism, which holds that everything about the mind can, in principle, be explained by physical facts. They point to advances in artificial intelligence, where computers can mimic certain mental tasks, suggesting that the mind is a kind of information processing that could be reproduced in hardware. Yet even physicalists admit that the exact recipe for consciousness is still unknown. The puzzle also touches on ethics. If the mind is just brain chemistry, then altering brain chemistry with drugs could be seen as changing a person's identity. Some worry that powerful neuroenhancers could create a class of people whose minds are chemically tuned, raising questions about fairness. If the mind is beyond the body, then interventions that target the brain might be viewed as assaults on the soul. This tension shows how the philosophical view can shape policy and personal choices. In education, teachers notice that a student's belief in their own ability can affect performance. A student who tells themselves, "I can solve this problem," may experience anxiety, which raises cortisol levels and hampers working memory. The student's mental attitude changes the body's chemistry, which in turn affects the mind's ability to think. This loop demonstrates the mind-body puzzle in a classroom setting. The puzzle also appears in art. A painter who feels a surge of inspiration may describe the moment as a stroke of genius that comes from nowhere. Yet neuroscience shows that the brain's visual and motor areas light up when the painter moves the brush. The painter's experience of a separate creative spark coexists with the physical activity of the brain and hand. Even simple daily habits reflect the puzzle. Drinking a cup of coffee can make a person feel more alert. The caffeine changes brain chemistry, blocking receptors that cause sleepiness. The person may notice the mental boost and attribute it to willpower, while the body is doing the heavy lifting. Conversely, a calming walk in nature can lower heart rate and reduce stress hormones, leading to a clearer mind. The body's state influences mental clarity, showing the two sides at work. The story of the mind-body puzzle is still unfinished. New tools like brain-computer interfaces allow people to move a robotic arm just by thinking. The device reads electrical signals from the motor cortex and translates them into movement. This technology blurs the line between thought and action, suggesting that the mind can directly control a machine without a traditional body part. At the same time, philosophers ask whether the feeling of control is truly mental or just a pattern of brain activity. One recent experiment asked participants to imagine falling while lying still in a lab. The participants reported a vivid sense of dropping, even though no motion occurred. Brain scans showed activity in the vestibular system, the part of the brain that helps balance. The brain created a feeling of motion without any actual movement. This case shows how the mind can generate bodily sensations, and how the body's senses can be tricked by mental activity. In the end, the mind-body puzzle invites people to wonder about what makes them who they are. Is the self a ghost that rides the brain, or is it a pattern that emerges from the brain's chemistry? The answer may not be a single line, but a blend of ideas. Some thinkers propose that the mind is a story the brain tells about itself, while the body provides the stage on which the story unfolds. Others hold that the mind is a separate player that can influence the stage. Both views capture parts of the lived experience. The puzzle also reminds people that science and philosophy grow together. When a scientist discovers a new brain pathway, philosophers ask what that means for the nature of consciousness. When a philosopher proposes a new way to think about the mind, scientists test it with experiments. The dialogue keeps the question alive and pushes knowledge forward. To close, the mind-body puzzle remains a central theme in human thought. From ancient debates about animal souls to modern brain scans of falling dreams, the question of how thoughts and bodies relate has shaped philosophy, medicine, law, and everyday life. The story continues as new discoveries shed light on old mysteries, and as each generation brings fresh analogies, anecdotes, and arguments to the table. Whether the mind is a separate spirit, a product of chemistry, or something that cannot be neatly boxed, the puzzle invites each person to reflect on their own experience of thinking, feeling, and being in the world. Freedom and determinism sit opposite each other like two doors in a quiet hallway. One door promises the power to choose, the other hints that each step has already been set. The clash between free choice and predetermined events has been a constant thread in philosophy. It began long before modern science, and it still hums in the minds of psychologists, neuroscientists, and everyday people. The story starts in ancient Greece. Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century BCE, asked how things come to be. He said that every event has a cause and a purpose. He wrote, "All men by nature desire to know." In his view, the world works like a chain of causes that can be traced back. Yet he also believed that people can act for reasons they understand. He called this ability voluntary action. For Aristotle, a person can move toward a goal if the mind sees the goal as good. This early mix of cause and choice set the stage for later debates. Soon after, the Stoics entered the scene. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that the universe follows a fixed order called fate. He said that what happens to a person is part of a larger plan. At the same time, Epictetus urged his listeners to focus on what they can control, their own judgments. He wrote, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." This line shows the Stoic split. The world may be set, but the mind can still respond freely. The Stoic view of fate became a historical anecdote that many later thinkers would recall when they talked about determinism. Spinoza, writing in the 17th century, pushed the deterministic side further. He claimed that everything follows from the nature of God, which he identified with nature itself. In his Ethics, he wrote, "All things are determined by the necessity of the divine nature." For Spinoza, freedom is not the ability to break the chain of cause, but the understanding of why the chain exists. When a person sees the necessity behind an event, they are free in a different sense. Spinoza's idea gave philosophers a clear, logical picture of a world where every event is fixed, yet human understanding can still feel free. The conversation did not stop with philosophers. In the 19th century, scientists began to test how habits form. The psychologist William James performed an experiment with a group of children who were asked to tap a key each time a light turned on. Over many repetitions, the children began to tap even when the light was off, simply because the habit had formed. This habit formation experiment showed that repeated exposure can create automatic responses, suggesting that some of what feels like free choice may actually be a learned pattern. The experiment became a historical note that psychologists still cite when they discuss how much of behavior is shaped by the environment. Modern psychology adds more pieces to the puzzle. B.F. Skinner, a behaviorist, argued that all human actions are shaped by past rewards and punishments. He wrote, "A person's behavior is determined by environmental histories of reinforcement. From this view, the feeling of choosing a snack is really the result of past experiences that taught the body to seek certain flavors when hunger strikes." Another modern voice, Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist who won a Nobel Prize, showed that many decisions happen without conscious awareness. He said, "Our choices are often driven by unconscious processes. These statements remind the listener that the brain may be working behind the scenes, even when a person feels they are making a free choice." To see how the clash works in everyday life, imagine a simple scenario. A person feels a rumble in the stomach. The body sends a signal that it needs fuel. The mind looks at the kitchen and sees an apple, a cookie, and a piece of cheese. The person decides to eat the apple because it feels light and healthy. At first glance, this looks like a free choice. Yet the decision is also shaped by many earlier events. The person's childhood habit of reaching for fruit, the health advice read in a magazine, the taste memory of apples, and the current level of hunger. Each of those factors pushes the mind toward the apple. The choice feels free, but it rests on a web of prior causes. A second scenario shows the tension in a more urgent setting. A teacher announces a surprise test. A student, caught off guard, must decide whether to study right then or wait for a later time. The student thinks about past experiences. The stress of last-minute cramming, the satisfaction of a good grade after studying early, the fear of failure. The student then chooses to study immediately. This decision appears to be an act of free will, a response to a sudden need. Yet the decision is also guided by the student's memory of earlier outcomes, the brain's assessment of risk, and the social pressure to perform. The choice is a blend of cause and freedom. These everyday moments illustrate how the arguments for determinism and for free will intersect. The deterministic side says that every thought, feeling, and action can be traced back to earlier causes. The free will side says that people can step outside those causes and choose something new. Both sides have strong points, and both have counter-arguments. One counter-argument for strict determinism comes from the idea of moral responsibility. If every action is preset, then it seems unfair to praise or blame anyone. A person who steals a loaf of bread would have done so because of a chain of causes beyond their control. Critics of strict determinism argue that without real choice, society would lose the basis for justice. They ask, how can a court punish someone if the person could not have acted otherwise? This question pushes back against the view that everything is fixed. A second counter-argument defends absolute free will. It points to moments when people act against their own interests or break habits. A smoker who decides to quit, a soldier who refuses an order, a teenager who rebels against family expectations. These acts seem to show that people can choose differently from what the past would predict. Proponents of free will argue that such breaks in pattern prove that the mind can override deterministic forces. They claim that the feeling of agency is not an illusion, but a real capacity to shape one's path. Worldwide applications of this debate appear in law, education, and mental health. In law, judges often consider whether a defendant acted under duress or with full control. The concept of diminished capacity reflects a blend of deterministic and free will thinking. In education, teachers design curricula that aim to give students choices, believing that autonomy improves learning. At the same time, they recognize that habits and prior knowledge shape how students absorb new material. In mental health, therapists help clients see how old patterns drive current behavior, while also encouraging them to make new, intentional choices. These fields show that the clash is not just abstract. It guides policies and practices. Modern interpretations add new layers. Neuroscience shows that brain activity can predict a decision a few seconds before a person reports being aware of it. In experiments, participants press a button when they feel ready. Brain scans reveal that the motor cortex becomes active before the participant says they have decided. Some interpret this as evidence that the brain decides first, and consciousness follows. Others argue that the brain's early activity reflects preparation, not a final choice, and that consciousness still has a role in confirming or vetoing the action. Quantum physics also enters the conversation. At the smallest scales, particles behave in ways that are not strictly determined. Some philosophers suggest that this fundamental randomness could open a space for free will. Others caution that random events are not the same as purposeful choices. The debate continues, showing how the clash adapts to new scientific findings. Analogies help make the ideas clearer. Think of a river flowing down a valley. The shape of the valley determines the path of the water, that is the deterministic part. Yet the water can still swirl, create eddies, and carve new small channels within the valley. Those swirls represent moments of choice within constraints. Another analogy uses a roadmap. The map shows all possible routes, like the set of causes that exist. A driver can pick any road, but the driver cannot drive through a mountain that does not exist. The driver's freedom is limited by the terrain, just as human freedom is limited by biology and history. Historical anecdotes add color. The ancient Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius kept a journal where he wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." He lived as a ruler during wars, yet he reminded himself that external events were beyond his control. His writings illustrate how Stoics lived with the belief that fate set the stage, but personal judgment could still shape one's inner life. Another anecdote comes from the 19th century psychologist Edward Thorndike, who studied cats in puzzle boxes. He found that the cats learned to escape faster after repeated attempts, a process he called the law of effect. The law says that actions followed by a satisfying result become more likely. Thorndike's work showed that behavior can be shaped by past outcomes, supporting a deterministic view of habit formation. Quotes from primary sources punctuate the discussion. Aristotle wrote, "The soul never thinks without an object." This line hints that thoughts are always about something that already exists, suggesting a link between cause and thought. Spinoza declared, "Freedom is the knowledge of necessity." By defining freedom as understanding, he turned the deterministic chain into a source of empowerment. Epictetus reminded listeners, "It is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." This ancient line still resonates when people argue that changing one's view can change the feeling of being trapped. B.F. Skinner summed up his view with, "The environment determines behavior." Daniel Kahneman added, "We are often unaware of the forces that shape our decisions." These quotes anchor the modern discussion in the words of the thinkers themselves. The clash between freedom and determinism also appears in everyday habits. Consider the habit of checking a phone first thing in the morning. The brain has learned that the phone provides news, messages, and a quick dopamine hit. When the alarm rings, the hand reaches for the device without a conscious plan. Yet a person can decide to leave the phone across the room, breaking the habit. The act of moving the phone shows a moment where intention overrules the automatic pull. This example mirrors the earlier snack scenario, showing how habit and choice dance together. A second everyday illustration involves driving. A driver approaches an intersection with a green light. The brain processes the light, the speed, the distance to the car ahead, and the driver's intention to arrive on time. The driver decides to speed up slightly to beat the light. The decision feels free, but it is also guided by traffic laws, the driver's experience, and the vehicle's capabilities. If the driver had a different set of experiences, perhaps a recent ticket, the choice might have been different. This shows how external causes shape what feels like a free decision. The conversation also reaches into the realm of art. A painter may feel compelled to use a certain color because of a memory of a sunset. The memory is a cause, yet the painter can choose to ignore it and pick a different hue. The tension between the pull of memory and the act of choosing highlights the same clash that philosophers have examined for centuries. In education, the concept of growth mindset reflects the blend of determinism and freedom. Psychologist Carol Dweck found that students who believe abilities can grow tend to work harder and improve. The belief itself can change behavior, showing that a mental shift can alter the course set by earlier experiences. At the same time, the student's background, family support, and previous successes still influence how far the new mindset can go. This example shows how modern psychology uses the language of freedom while acknowledging deterministic factors. The debate also informs how societies view addiction. Some argue that addiction is a deterministic result of brain chemistry and early exposure. Others emphasize personal agency in choosing to seek help. Treatment programs often combine both views. They recognize that the brain's wiring makes cravings strong, but they also teach coping skills that rely on deliberate choice. This synthesis mirrors the philosophical middle ground that many contemporary thinkers adopt. Philosophers today often avoid the extremes of strict determinism and absolute free will. They propose compatibilism, the idea that free will can exist within a deterministic universe. Compatibilists say that a person is free when they act according to their desires, even if those desires have causes. They argue that the feeling of freedom matters, and that it can be compatible with a chain of cause and effect. This view tries to keep the moral responsibility that people need while accepting that many factors shape actions. Critics of compatibilism point out that if desires themselves are caused, then the person is not truly the origin of the action. They claim that true freedom would require the ability to start a new chain of causes without any prior influence. This criticism fuels the defense of absolute free will, which holds that at least some actions start without deterministic antecedents. The scientific study of brain networks adds nuance. Researchers have identified the prefrontal cortex as a region involved in planning and self-control. When this area is active, people are more likely to make choices that align with long-term goals rather than immediate impulses. This suggests that the brain can modulate deterministic drives, offering a biological basis for a kind of freedom. However, the development of the prefrontal cortex is itself shaped by genetics and early experiences, linking the capacity for choice back to deterministic roots. Another modern angle looks at social influences. Sociologists note that cultural norms, family expectations, and economic conditions shape the range of options people see. A person born into a wealthy family may feel free to pursue many careers, while someone in poverty may feel forced into limited work. The social context creates a set of constraints that act like a deterministic backdrop. Yet within those constraints, individuals still find ways to express personal values, showing that freedom can be relative. The clash also appears in legal theory. The concept of mens rea, or guilty mind, requires that a person have a certain mental state when committing a crime. Courts examine whether the defendant acted voluntarily or under compulsion. The legal system thus assumes that people can choose, but also that certain forces can reduce responsibility. This balance reflects the ongoing negotiation between deterministic and free will ideas. In literature, authors often explore the theme of choice versus fate. In a classic novel, a hero receives a prophecy that he will die in battle. He can accept the prophecy or try to avoid it. The story shows that even when a future seems set, the hero's decisions still matter to the narrative. Such stories echo the philosophical tension, using characters to illustrate abstract ideas. The discussion of freedom and determinism also touches on technology. Artificial intelligence can predict human behavior with increasing accuracy. Recommendation algorithms suggest movies, music, and products based on past clicks. When a person follows a recommendation, it feels like a choice, but the algorithm has nudged the decision. This raises questions about how much autonomy remains when machines shape options. Some argue that awareness of the algorithm's influence can restore a sense of freedom, while others see it as a new form of determinism. The philosophical clash has never been static. Each era adds new evidence and new language. The ancient Stoics saw fate as a cosmic order. The Enlightenment brought reason and the idea of a rational self. The 19th century introduced experimental psychology. The 20th century added behaviorism and cognitive science. The 21st century brings brain imaging and big data. Through each change, the core question remains. Purpose and meaning have been a quiet question for many people. It sits in the heart of daily life. It can feel like a soft light in a dark room. It can also feel like a heavy stone that no one wants to lift. The calm voice of this channel will walk through the ideas, the stories, and the real ways people find purpose. The story will start with two famous thinkers. Then it will move to simple examples. Then it will look at two strong objections. Finally, it will end with modern thoughts and a hopeful note. Albert Camus wrote about a world that does not give a clear answer. He called this the absurd. The absurd is the clash between a human wish for order and a world that offers none. Camus said that the absurd does not mean that life is empty. He wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." In plain words, the effort to reach something can give a feeling of purpose. Camus also wrote, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." That line tells us that even when life feels cold, a warm inner drive can stay alive. Viktor Frankl lived through the worst of the absurd. He survived the Holocaust and later wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl said that the strongest thing a person can have is a why. He quoted Nietzsche, saying, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." In simple terms, if a person knows a reason to keep going, the hard parts become easier. Frankl also wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This means that purpose can grow even when outside events stay the same." Both Camus and Frankl agree that purpose is not handed down from outside. They say it is something each person builds. The next part shows how ordinary people do that. Consider a person named Maya. Maya spends Saturday mornings at a local animal shelter. She feeds cats, cleans cages, and talks to each animal. The shelter is small, but it needs help. Maya says she feels a calm joy when a shy cat finally purrs. She says that the small act of caring gives her day a clear shape. Maya's story shows a simple way to find purpose. The act is not grand, but it is real. It fills a need, and it fills her heart. Now think of a man named Luis. Luis works in a busy office. After work, he goes to a small workshop in his garage. He builds wooden toys for his grandchildren. He sandpaper, paints, and sometimes makes a mistake. Each finished toy makes his grandson smile. Luis says the hobby gives him a reason to stay up late on a weekday. The hobby is not about money. It is about a feeling of creating something that lives on. Luis's story shows another path to meaning. The act of making, even in a quiet corner, can be a purpose. Both examples show that purpose can be found in caring for others or in creating something. The ideas fit with Camus' claim that the struggle itself can be enough. They also fit with Frankl's claim that a why can help survive hard days. But not everyone agrees that purpose can be found this way. Two common objections appear in the conversation. The first objection says that life has no built-in purpose. It claims that the universe is just a collection of atoms moving by chance. There is no hidden plan. This view often uses the word nihilism, which means nothing matters. A person who holds this view might say, if there is no cosmic reason, then any purpose we claim is just a story we tell ourselves. The story can still be useful, but it is not a real answer. This objection asks, why trust a story that we make up? The second objection says that purpose must be assigned by society. It argues that the rules, jobs, and roles given by a community tell each person what to aim for. A critic might say, if a person steps outside the roles set by family, religion, or nation, then they are lost. This view worries that personal purpose can become selfish or chaotic. It suggests that a shared purpose, like serving the nation or the church, is what keeps people safe and together. Both objections have weight. The first points out that no one can point to a universal purpose written in the sky. The second warns that too much personal freedom can break the bonds that hold a group together. The next sections will look at how people answer these doubts. A real diary from a world war, I Soldier, gives a glimpse of purpose under fire. Private James Collins wrote on a rainy night in 1944. The night is dark, and the bombs fall far. I think of my mother's garden back home. I cannot see the end of this road, but the thought of planting a seed when I return gives me a reason to keep my rifle steady. James' words show how a simple image of future work can act as a purpose. Even when the world seemed to crumble, the thought of planting a seed helped him stay alive. The diary entry does not mention any grand plan. It only mentions a small, personal goal. That small goal became a beacon in the storm. A different voice from the 1960s civil rights movement also speaks about purpose. In a speech delivered in 1963, activist Rosa Alvarez said, "We march because we know that each step we take moves a child towards school, a mother towards safety, a child toward hope. Our purpose is not a single voice. It is the chorus of many hearts." Rosa's speech shows purpose as a shared song. She did not claim that a higher power gave her a purpose. She said the purpose grew from the need of many people. The speech shows that purpose can be both personal and collective. These two anecdotes give a sense of how purpose can appear in very different settings. In the war, purpose was a private image of future life. In the Civil Rights March, purpose was a public call to help others. Both fit with Camus' idea that the act of moving forward can be enough. Both also fit with Frankl's idea that a why can help survive any how. Everyday role models also show how purpose can be built. A teacher who stays after school to help a struggling student shows purpose in service. A neighbor who fixes a broken fence for an elderly neighbor shows purpose in community. These small actions echo the larger ideas of Camus and Frankl without using big words. Now consider how purpose shows up in modern life. Many people look at technology. Some say that the purpose of a smartphone is to connect people. Others say the purpose is to sell apps. A person named Sam uses his phone to record bird songs. He uploads them to a free site where teachers can use them. Sam says his purpose is to share nature's music with students who cannot go outside. Sam's story shows that purpose can be found even in tools that were not meant for that use. He takes a device made for profit and turns it into a teaching aid. The purpose is not written on the phone. It is written in Sam's mind. Another modern example comes from a person who volunteers online. Maya, the same name as the shelter volunteer, but a different person, helps translate medical information into simple language for people in remote villages. She does not get paid. She says that each translated article saves a life. Her purpose is to make knowledge clear. This shows that purpose can cross borders and languages. It also shows that purpose can be a bridge between the world's information and a single person's need. These modern examples show that purpose does not have to be a single fixed thing. It can shift, grow, and adapt. The ideas of Camus and Frankl still fit. Camus would say that the act of creating meaning in a digital world is a kind of rebellion against a meaningless universe. Frankl would say that Maya's why helps her survive any obstacles, like slow internet or language barriers. The two objections still linger. The first objection, that there is no built-in purpose, can be answered by pointing to the many stories people tell themselves. A story is not a fact, but it can be a guide. When a person chooses a story that lifts them, that story becomes a tool. The tool can be as strong as any physical object. The second objection, that purpose must come from society, can be met by looking at how societies change. The civil rights movement showed that a group can create a new purpose together, not just follow an old one. Rosa Alvarez's speech reminded people that purpose can be a shared decision, not a forced rule. An analogy can help. Imagine a garden. Some gardeners plant seeds because the garden owner told them to. Others plant seeds because they love the smell of fresh soil. The garden will grow either way, but the feeling of the gardener differs. The first gardener follows an assigned purpose. The second gardener follows a personal purpose. Both can produce fruit, but the joy of the second gardener may be deeper. The garden also shows that purpose can be both given and chosen. The soil is like the world. The seeds are like actions. The water and sunlight are like the support from others. The gardener's choice is the high that Frankl talks about. Another analogy uses a road trip. A driver can follow a map that someone else drew, or the driver can decide to explore new paths. The map gives direction, but the driver's curiosity gives excitement. If the road is blocked, the driver can still find a new way. This picture matches Camus' idea that the struggle itself can be enough. The driver does not need a final destination to feel the trip is worth it. Real-world applications of purpose can be seen in healthcare. Doctors often say that helping a patient recover gives them purpose. A nurse who stays late to comfort a dying patient finds meaning in the small moments. The hospital's mission statement may say, "to heal," but each staff member adds a personal layer. The personal layer can be a story about a family member who survived illness. That story becomes a private why. In education, teachers often ask students to write about their goals. The assignment is not just about future jobs. It is a way to let students think about what matters to them. When a student writes, "I want to learn how to code so I can make games for kids with disabilities," that sentence becomes a purpose. The teacher can see the purpose and help the student grow. The purpose guides the student's choices, just as Camus would say, the struggle guides the heart. In business, purpose is often spoken about as a company, see mission. Some critics say this is just marketing. The objection fits the idea that purpose must be assigned by society. However, when employees feel that the mission matches their own values, they often stay longer and work harder. The mission becomes a shared story, not a forced rule. The story can change over time as the company learns new things. Now turn to the two counter-arguments again, but look at them through the lens of the anecdotes. James Collins' diary shows that a private image can be a purpose even when the world offers no clear plan. His purpose was not given by society. It came from his own mind. Rosa Alvarez's speech shows that a group can decide on a purpose together, not just accept one handed down. The civil rights movement created a new purpose that was shared, not forced. What about people who feel lost? They may ask, what if I cannot find any purpose? Camus would answer that the search itself is a kind of purpose. The act of looking is a step forward. Frankl would say that even in the smallest act, like breathing or smiling at a stranger, there is a why. The why may be simple, but it still matters. A practical tip can help listeners. First, notice what makes a heart beat a little faster. Second, ask what problem feels important to solve. Third, try a small action that matches that feeling. If the action feels good, it may be a seed of purpose. If it feels empty, try another. The process is like planting many seeds and seeing which sprout. A final quote from Camus can close the thought. The only way to deal with an absurd world is to imagine a lucid mind. A lucid mind sees both the lack of a given purpose and the power to make one. A final quote from Frankl can add balance. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The why can be small, like a hobby, or large, like a movement. The how can be any challenge. In the end, purpose and meaning are not one size fits all. They can be found in a shelter, in a workshop, in a diary, in a speech, in a garden, or in a road. They can be personal or shared. They can grow even when the world seems cold. The calm voice of this channel hopes that each listener can hear a small call inside. That call can be the first step toward a purpose that feels true. The journey may be long, but each step adds light. The story of purpose continues, one quiet action at a time. The question of nothingness has been a quiet thread in human thought for as long as language has existed. It is not a question about empty boxes or missing objects alone. It is a question about why there can be a gap, why there can be a pause, why there can be a space that feels like more than just the lack of something. It matters because every moment that feels empty also shapes how people live, think, and act. When a song ends and silence fills the room, the silence is not just the absence of sound. It is a feeling that makes the listener notice the end, the memory, the breath that follows. When a person walks into a room that feels empty, the emptiness is not only the lack of furniture. It is a sense that makes the mind wander, that can calm or can unsettle. These simple moments point to a deeper idea that philosophers have tried to name and to understand. Laozi, the ancient Chinese sage, wrote about the void in a way that still feels fresh. He said, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name." In the next line he added, "We look at the shape of things, but we miss the emptiness that lets them hold." For Laozi, the empty space inside a cup, the space between the notes of a melody, is what makes the cup useful and the music beautiful. The emptiness is not a flaw. It is a purpose. Laozi's words suggest that nothingness is not just a gap, but a condition that allows things to be what they are. Heidegger, a German thinker of the 20th century, took the idea of nothingness in a different direction. He asked, "Why is there being at all, and not rather nothing?" He wrote, "The nothing is not a thing. The nothing is the clearing in which beings appear." Heidegger's view makes the void a kind of light that lets things show up. He does not treat the void as a simple whole. He treats it as a horizon, a background that makes any appearance possible. When Heidegger speaks of the clearing, he is pointing to a space that is not filled, yet is essential for anything to be seen. The story of a medieval monk named Brother Anselm helps to see how the idea of nothingness can become a daily practice. In the 13th century, Anselm spent long hours in a stone cell with a single candle. He would stare at the dark wall and say, "In the void I find God's breath." He wrote in his notebook, "When the mind meets the empty, the heart learns to hear the whisper of the divine." For Anselm, the empty wall was not a boring surface. It was a place where the mind could meet the mystery of what is not there, and yet feel something deep. His contemplation shows how the void can be a spiritual tool, a way to feel a presence that is not seen. A different kind of contemplation came from a physicist named Albert Einstein in the early 20th century. While working on his theory of relativity, Einstein wrote in a letter, "The more I study, the more I see that the universe is not empty, but full of a subtle field that we call space." He also said, "Even when we think of a vacuum, there is still a background, a structure that shapes light and matter." Einstein's view of empty space was not that it is a simple void. He saw it as a stage that can bend, stretch, and affect the motion of planets. His ideas made the scientific world think of nothingness as a kind of hidden fabric. The idea that nothingness is just a lack of stuff is one common way to answer the question. This answer says that empty space is simply the absence of objects, that silence is simply the lack of sound, that an empty room is simply a room without furniture. It treats the void as a neutral background, like a plain wall that does nothing. This view can be helpful in everyday life. When a child asks why the sky is blue, the answer that there is no color in the sky itself, only scattered light, works well. The same logic can be used for nothingness. It is simply what is left when something is taken away. In this sense, nothingness is not a deep mystery. It is a simple subtraction. A second answer treats nothingness as a deep mystery that cannot be reduced to a simple lack. This view says that the void has its own character, its own power, its own meaning. It claims that the silence after a song is not just the end of notes, but a space that lets the melody linger in the mind. It claims that an empty room can make a person feel awe, fear, or peace, because the emptiness invites the mind to fill it with thoughts. This perspective sees the void as a kind of mirror that reflects back what the mind brings to it. The mystery lies in why the mind reacts at all to something that is not there. It is a puzzle that philosophers have kept returning to. One simple analogy can help to see both sides. Imagine a blank sheet of paper. On one hand, the paper is simply a surface with no ink. It is just empty. On the other hand, that same blank page can be a place where a story begins, where a drawing can be made, where a thought can be recorded. The emptiness of the page is not just a lack. It is also a possibility. The same idea works for silence. The silence after a song is not just the absence of sound, it is the moment where the listener can hear the echo of the melody in their own mind. Another analogy uses a dark room. If a room has no light, it is simply dark. That is the lack of stuff answer. Yet, many people feel a sense of calm or a sense of tension in a dark room. The darkness can make the mind focus on inner thoughts, or can make the heart race. The darkness becomes a space that shapes feeling. It is not just a lack of light. It is a condition that changes the way people experience the world. The story of the medieval monk shows how a person can use the void as a tool for inner growth. Brother Anselm would sit in his cell, close his eyes, and imagine the world as a vast empty field. He would say, "When the field is empty, the seed can fall without obstruction." He used the image of emptiness to think about how a soul can be free from distractions. His practice shows that nothingness can be a positive force, a way to clear the mind. Einstein's discussion of empty space shows how science can also treat the void as more than a simple gap. He wrote, "Space is not nothing. Space has a geometry that tells matter how to move." This idea made physicists think of the vacuum as something that can have energy, that can pop particles in and out of existence. The modern concept of quantum vacuum is a direct descendant of this view. It shows that the scientific world also sees the void as a field of potential, not just a hole. Heidegger's question about why there is being at all and not nothing brings the philosophical side into focus. He argued that the experience of nothingness is what makes us aware of our own existence. When a person feels the silence after a song, they become aware that they are listening, that they have a mind that can notice. When a person feels the emptiness of a room, they become aware that they are present in that space. The void, in this view, is a trigger for self-awareness. It is not a passive backdrop, but an active part of how people come to know themselves. Laozi's teaching about the usefulness of emptiness adds another layer. He said that a cup is useful because it is empty inside. A wheel is useful because there is a hollow space that lets it turn. The emptiness is what makes the object work. This idea can be taken to human life. A person who can sit with nothing, who can endure a pause, can become more creative. The pause after a song can inspire a new melody. The empty room can become a place for meditation. The void becomes a source of potential. The modern world still meets the question of nothingness in many ways. In art, a painter may leave a blank area on the canvas to let the eye rest. In music, a composer may insert a rest, a short silence, to give the listener a moment to breathe. In technology, engineers design dead zones in a signal to avoid interference. In each case, the empty space is not a mistake. It is a design choice that shapes the final result. The idea that nothingness can be useful is now a common principle in many fields. In everyday life, the feeling of an empty room can be a cue to clean, to rearrange, or to invite guests. The silence after a song can be a cue to applaud, to reflect, or to start a new conversation. These small moments show that nothingness can guide actions. It can tell a person when to speak and when to listen. It can tell a person when to act and when to wait. One more historical anecdote comes from the early 20th century, when a physicist named Paul Dirac wrote about the vacuum state. He said, "Even the empty vacuum teems with a sea of possibilities." Dirac's idea was that even when nothing seems to be there, there is a hidden activity at the smallest scale. This view made later scientists think of the void as a buzzing background, not a silent void. It gave rise to the concept of zero-point energy, a term that still appears in popular science shows. Dirac's words show how the scientific view of nothingness can be both mysterious and practical. A different anecdote comes from the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who wrote about nothingness as a part of human freedom. He said, "Man is condemned to be free because there is no predetermined essence." He used the idea of a gap, a lack of a fixed nature, to argue that people must create their own meaning. For Sartre, the emptiness of a pre-written script gives each person the chance to write their own story. This shows that the philosophical idea of nothingness can be linked to ethics and personal choice. The question of whether nothingness is merely a lack or a deep mystery can be tested with a simple experiment. Take a cup and fill it with water. When the water is poured out, the cup is empty. The emptiness can be measured. It can be seen as a space that can hold water again. That is the lack view. Now, look at the same empty cup and think about how the shape of the cup allows it to hold water. The empty space inside the cup is what gives the cup its purpose. That is the deep view. Both perspectives are true in different ways. The empty cup is both a lack and a potential. The same experiment can be done with sound. Play a short melody on a piano. When the last note fades, there is a brief silence. One can think of that silence as simply the end of sound, or one can think of it as the space that lets the listener feel the melody linger. The silence can make the next piece stand out more. In this sense, the silence is not just a gap, it is a part of the musical story. The modern philosopher Thomas Metzinger talks about the transparent self as a kind of mental nothingness. He writes, "When the brain stops representing itself as an object, the self disappears." This idea shows that the mind can turn off its own image, creating a mental void. Some meditation practices aim for that very state. A mind without thoughts, a mental emptiness that feels calm. The practice shows that nothingness can be a goal, not just a side effect. In everyday language, people often use the word nothing to mean nothing important. When a child asks, "What's for dinner?" and the answer is nothing, the child knows that there is no food yet. In this simple use, nothing is just a placeholder for the lack of something. Yet, the same word can be used to talk about deep ideas. When a poet writes, "In the nothing I find everything," the word takes on a richer sense. The shift shows how language can move between the simple lack and the profound mystery. The question of why nothingness matters can be answered by looking at how it shapes human experience. When a person feels the emptiness of a night sky, they may feel small, they may feel awe, they may feel peace. The same night sky can inspire stories about the heavens, about destiny, about the unknown. The void above becomes a canvas for imagination. The emptiness of the sky is not just a lack of clouds. It is a space that invites wonder. The concept of nothingness also appears in ethics. Some moral philosophers argue that a world without suffering would be an empty world, lacking the contrast that gives happiness its value. Others say that a world with no pain would be a better world, even if it feels empty. The debate shows that the idea of emptiness can be used to argue about what makes life good. The emptiness itself becomes a tool for moral reasoning. In literature, the void often appears as a theme. In the novel Heart of Darkness, the narrator describes the jungle as a place where the usual rules seem to disappear, where a sense of nothingness creeps in. In poetry, the line, "The silence after the storm," points to a moment where everything seems to stop, and the mind fills the gap with meaning. These works use nothingness to create mood, to highlight the inner life of characters. The modern digital age also brings new questions about nothingness. When a phone screen goes dark, the user experiences a brief pause. That pause can be a moment to reflect, to check the next notification, or to feel a little anxious. The empty screen can be a space that makes the next message feel more important. In this way, the digital void shapes how people think about time and attention. The concept of nothingness has also been used in politics. A leader may speak of a void in leadership to suggest that the lack of a strong figure creates chaos. The same phrase can be used to argue that the current system is empty of justice, that something must be filled. The void becomes a rhetorical tool. It shows how the idea can move from philosophy to public discourse. Returning to Laozi, his teaching about the usefulness of emptiness can be summed up in a short line. "Empty your cup, and it will be ready to receive." This line is often quoted in business, in teaching, in self-help. It shows how an ancient idea about nothingness can travel across time and culture. The simple image of an empty cup continues to inspire people to let go of preconceptions. Heidegger's phrase, "The nothing is not a thing," can be heard in many modern discussions about the meaning of life. Some people repeat the line, "We are born into a world of nothing, and we must give it meaning." The phrase has become a shorthand for the idea that the world does not come with a built-in purpose, that people must create purpose themselves. The phrase shows how a philosophical insight can become part of everyday speech. The two counter-arguments about nothingness, one that says it is just a lack, the other that says it is a deep mystery. Both have strong points. The lack view is easy to understand. It fits with everyday experience. It helps people to describe a room without furniture, a sky without stars, a mind without thoughts. The deep mystery view invites people to look beyond the surface. It asks why the mind reacts to a gap, why a pause can feel heavy, why an empty space can feel alive. Both views can be held at once, like two sides of a coin. The medieval monk's story shows how the deep view can be lived. Brother Anselm did not just see the empty wall as a wall. He saw it as a place where God could be heard. He turned the lack into a spiritual experience. His practice shows that the void can be a doorway, not just an absence. Einstein's view shows how the scientific community can see the deep side. He did not treat space as a simple nothing. He treated it as a field that can bend light, that can affect time. His equations gave the empty vacuum a role in the motion of planets. The empty space in his theory is not a simple gap, but a part of the cosmic time is more than a ticking clock. It is the way people feel the world moves and the way they place events in a line. In the early centuries of the Christian world, Augustine of Hippo asked a simple question that still rings true today. He wrote, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know it. If I want to explain it, I do not know." Augustine's words show that even a learned mind can feel the mystery of time. He tried to split time into three parts: the past that is gone, the present that is now, and the future that has not yet come. He said the past lives in memory, the future lives in hope, and only the present lives in the mind. This three-part view makes it easy to see why a child can feel time in a very different way from an adult. A child's view of time is often shown in a playground. When a child waits for the swing to stop, a minute can feel like an hour. When the child finally gets the turn, the same minute feels like a flash. The child does not count seconds with a watch. The child feels the stretch and the snap of each moment. In that feeling, the child lives the same split that Augustine described. The waiting moment lives in memory, the hope of the turn lives in expectation, and the swing itself lives in the now. The child's sense of time is raw, not measured, and it reminds a calm narrator that time can be felt as a shape, not just a number. Modern science adds another layer to this feeling. Albert Einstein, in a short and clear way, said that the line we draw between past, present, and future is not a solid wall, but a stubborn illusion. He showed that when someone moves fast, the clock on the moving object ticks slower than the clock on the street. In simple terms, time can stretch or shrink depending on speed. Einstein's theory of relativity tells that time is not the same everywhere, that it can bend around a heavy planet or speed up for a fast spaceship. This scientific picture does not erase the feeling of a child waiting for a swing, but it shows that the feeling has a deeper rule behind it. Everyday life gives many chances to see how time shapes being. Imagine waiting for a bus at a cold stop. The minutes stretch out while the person watches the street. The clock on the shelter shows the same numbers, but the mind fills the gap with thoughts about work, about the weather, about the next stop. When the bus finally arrives, the waiting time feels like a long story that ends suddenly. In that moment, the past, the waiting, lives in memory. The future, the ride, lives in hope. And the present, the bus door opening, lives in the now. The same pattern appears when a person remembers a birthday from years ago. The memory of the cake, the laughter, the gifts lives in the past. The desire to celebrate again lives in hope. The moment of blowing out candles today lives in the now. Both examples show that time is the thread that ties together what has happened, what is happening, and what might happen. Not everyone agrees that time works like a river that always flows forward. One counter-argument says that time is an illusion. Philosophers such as Parmenides argued that change is not real, and that what we call time is just a trick of the mind. In this view, the past, present, and future all exist at once, and the mind simply slides over a static picture. The famous line from a modern thinker captures this idea. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. This quote, often linked to Einstein, is used by those who think that time does not really pass, that it only seems to pass because the brain orders events. Another counter-argument takes the opposite extreme. It says that time is a fixed river that cannot be changed. This view is sometimes called the block universe. In it, every moment, past, present, and future, is already laid out, like pages in a book. A person cannot change the story. They can only turn the pages. The idea is that the future already exists, and what feels like choice is just moving along a pre-written path. Some philosophers point to the phrase, "all that is forever," to stress that the river of time does not flow, but simply is. This view clashes with the feeling of freedom that people have when they decide to take a different route to work or when they plan a surprise party. History gives concrete moments when people tried to shape time itself. In ancient Rome, the calendar was out of sync with the seasons. Farmers noticed that the harvest fell at the wrong time according to the official dates. To fix the problem, Julius Caesar ordered a reform in 46 BCE. He added extra days and introduced the leap year, creating a calendar that matched the sun's cycle more closely. This reform showed that societies can change the way they count time, but it also showed that the natural world does not bend to human counting. The calendar reform was a practical step, yet it also reminded people that time, as measured by the sun, runs its own course. A later, more experimental anecdote comes from the 1970s. Psychologists at Stanford University ran a study where participants wore a blindfold and sat in a quiet room for several minutes. The researchers asked the participants to estimate how long the silence lasted. Many guessed that the time had been much longer than it really was. The experiment showed that without external cues, the mind can stretch or shrink the sense of time. The result supports the idea that time is partly built by perception. It also shows that a child's feeling of a long wait can be explained by the brain's lack of signals, just as an adult's feeling can be altered by distraction. These stories, experiments, and ideas all point to one central point. Time shapes the sense of being. When a person feels that a bus is late, the feeling changes the mood, the patience, the willingness to wait. When a person remembers a birthday, the memory adds a layer of identity, linking who they were then to who they are now. When a philosopher writes about the past as memory, the present as attention, and the future as hope, the mind gains a map for living. When a scientist shows that a fast spaceship's clock runs slower, the map gains a rule that can be tested with satellites and GPS. When a child feels time stretch during a boring class, the feeling tells the brain that the present is not satisfying, prompting a search for change. The everyday examples also help to explain the two counter-arguments. In the bus stop scene, a person who believes time is an illusion might say that the feeling of waiting is just a mental trick, that the bus will arrive at the same moment whether the mind feels it is long or short. A person who believes time is a fixed river might argue that the bus arrival time was already set the moment the schedule was written, and the waiting mind cannot change that fact. Both views can be illustrated by the same simple story, showing how the same event can be read in different philosophical lenses. Modern interpretations often blend the old ideas with new science. Some thinkers argue that the brain creates a pictological present that lasts a few seconds, and that this window is what we actually live in. They say that the brain stitches together a flow of moments to make a story. Others point to the fact that modern physics treats time as a dimension, similar to space. In that view, moving forward in time is like moving forward on a road, but the road can be curved by mass. The road metaphor helps to keep the idea simple. Just as a hilly road can make a car go slower, a massive planet can make a clock tick slower. The blend of brain science and physics suggests that both the mind and the universe shape how time is felt. A quote from Augustine's Confessions, spoken in a quiet voice, captures the personal side of this blend. "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Though the quote is about longing for God, it also hints at the restless feeling of waiting. The restless heart is the same as the restless mind that watches the bus minutes stretch. The quote reminds a calm narrator that the feeling of time is tied to deeper human needs. Einstein's own words add a scientific tone. When a person travels at a speed close to that of light, the time for that person slows down compared to someone who stays still. This simple sentence explains the core of relativity without heavy jargon. It shows that time can change, that the feeling of a long wait can be more than a feeling when the world itself can stretch time. The child's view also appears in a modern study of play. Researchers asked children to draw a picture of time. Many children drew a line with the sun at one end and the moon at the other, showing that they see time as a path from day to night. The drawing matches Augustine's split of past, present, and future, but in a visual way that a child can understand. The drawing also matches the idea of a river, because a line can be a river flowing from one point to another. The child's simple picture thus brings together the two counter-arguments in a single image. To bring the ideas home, consider two more everyday scenes. First, think of a kitchen timer set for 10 minutes while a cake bakes. The timer ticks down, and the baker watches the numbers shrink. When the timer rings, the baker feels relief, and the cake is ready. The timer gives a clear count of seconds, but the baker's mind also feels the waiting. If the baker is hungry, the 10 minutes feel like a long stretch. If the baker is relaxed, the minutes pass quickly. The timer shows how an external measure of time can shape the inner feeling of being. Second, imagine a student looking at a photo album from high school. The pictures show friends laughing, a graduation cap, a first car. The student feels a mix of joy and nostalgia. The past lives in the images, but the feeling of those images lives now, in the moment of looking. The student may also hope to meet those friends again, which lives in the future. The photo album becomes a bridge that links the three parts of time, showing how memory, hope, and presence work together. Both scenes echo Augustine's three parts, Einstein's flexible clock, and the child's stretched feeling. They also show how the two counter-arguments can be tested. If time were an illusion, the timer ticking would be just a mental trick, yet the cake would still be baked at the same temperature. If time were a fixed river, the moment the cake finished would already exist, and the baker would simply be moving along a pre-written path. The everyday world does not give a clear answer, but it offers a way to feel the debate. In the ancient calendar reform, the Romans learned that counting days does not change the sun's rise. The reform was a human attempt to match the counting system to a natural cycle. The effort shows that people try to shape time, but the natural world keeps its own rhythm. The 1970s perception experiment shows that the mind can change the feeling of that rhythm when the senses are limited. Together, the two anecdotes illustrate how both external measures and internal perception play roles in the sense of being. Modern philosophers often talk about temporal consciousness, a term that simply means the way the mind knows about past, present, and future. They argue that this consciousness is what allows a person to plan, to remember, and to act. Without it, a person would be stuck in a single moment, unable to learn from yesterday or aim for tomorrow. The concept is simple. The brain keeps a short list of recent events, a longer list of memories, and a set of goals for the future. This list is what makes life feel like a story rather than a single snapshot. The story of time also appears in literature. In a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, a man reads a book that lists every possible future. The man feels both amazed and trapped, because the book seems to show that everything is already written. This literary picture matches the fixed river view. In contrast, a poem by Emily Dickinson talks about the stillness of the night that holds the breath of time. The poem suggests that time can be paused in a moment of feeling, echoing the illusion view. Both literary pieces help a calm narrator explain the abstract ideas in a way that listeners can picture. The Borges story gives a concrete image of a fixed future, while the Dickinson poem gives a feeling of a moment that stretches. The narrator can use these images to show how time can feel both solid and fluid. When the modern world uses GPS, the technology relies on Einstein's insight that time can change with speed and gravity. Satellites orbit high above Earth, moving fast and feeling weaker gravity. Their clocks tick a tiny bit faster than clocks on the ground. Engineers must correct for this difference, or else the GPS would be off by many meters each day. This real-world use of relativity shows that time is not just a feeling, but a factor that shapes daily life. It also shows that the scientific view can be applied to something as ordinary as finding a coffee shop. In another modern use, psychologists help patients with anxiety by teaching them to focus on the present moment. The practice, often called mindfulness, asks people to notice the breath, the sounds, the feel of the chair. By anchoring attention to the now, the mind can reduce the pull of past worries and future fears. This practice works because it changes how the brain treats time. It shortens the feeling of waiting and lengthens the feeling of calm. The technique shows that the sense of time can be trained, not just measured. Both applications, GPS and mindfulness, illustrate how time shapes being in opposite ways. One uses the physical rules of time to guide a device. The other uses the mental feeling of time to guide a mind. Together they show that time is a bridge between the outer world and the inner world. The two counter-arguments remain alive in these examples. The GPS system assumes that time is a real dimension that can be measured and corrected. A proponent of the illusion view might say that the numbers are just tools, and the real experience of driving does not change. The mindfulness approach assumes that the present can be expanded, which fits the illusion view that time can be reshaped by the mind. A proponent of the fixed river view might argue that the present moment is already set, and mindfulness is simply noticing a pre-written scene. The story of time, then, is a mix of feeling, measurement, and theory. Augustine's early thoughts give a simple map of memory, hope, and now. Einstein's adds a rule that time can stretch. A child's play shows how the feeling can change in a heartbeat. The bus stop and the birthday remind that everyday life is built on this map. The two counter-arguments offer different lenses. One says the map is a trick, the other says the map is a fixed road. The ancient calendar reform and the 1970s perception experiment give real moments when people tried to change the map or saw its limits. Modern tools like GPS and mindfulness show how the map can be used for practical ends. In the end, the calm narrator can leave the listener with a simple thought. Time is both a line that can be measured and a feeling that can stretch. It is the thread that ties yesterday, today, and tomorrow into a single story. Whether one sees it as an illusion, a river, or something else, the impact on how people live, hope, and remember remains the same. The sense of being is shaped by the way time is understood, felt, and used. The story of time continues, inviting each person to watch the clock, feel the waiting, and remember the moments that make life feel alive. The story of how people think about being has always followed the tools they use. Long before any screen flickered, a stone chisel gave shape to ideas, and a printed page spread them far and wide. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century changed the way people saw the world. Johannes Gutenberg's press made it possible for many eyes to read the same words at the same time. A farmer in a German village could hold a copy of a pamphlet that a scholar in Basel had printed weeks before. That sharing of text made the notion of a common public life feel more real. It also showed that a new medium could reshape what it meant to exist in a community. A few centuries later, another breakthrough arrived in a very different form. In 1978, the first video game arcade opened in a mall in New York. The machine, called Space Invaders, drew crowds of teenagers who stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on a glowing screen. The arcade was a place where people gathered not to talk, but to act through a digital avatar, a tiny spaceship that moved across a cathode ray tube. Even then, the experience hinted at a new kind of being, one that was partly inside a machine and partly outside it. Fast forward to the present day. Screens now fill almost every wall in a modern home. Phones, tablets, laptops, and smartwatches act as portals to a world where avatars, status updates, and live streams are part of daily life. The question that now occupies many philosophers is how these digital extensions change the idea of existence itself. Does a life lived online count as a full life? Does the feeling of pride that follows a liked post belong to the same realm as the satisfaction of a hand-shaken greeting? To answer these questions, several contemporary thinkers have offered their views. One of the most cited voices is Sherry Turkle, a professor who studies how technology shapes relationships. She writes that the presence of a screen changes the way people think about being present. Turkle argues that when a person watches a video call, the mind splits between the physical room and the digital one. This split, she says, can make the feeling of being seen feel both stronger and weaker at the same time. The screen acts like a mirror that reflects a version of the self that is carefully edited. That edited version can become a source of comfort, but it can also hide the messier parts of a real face-to-face moment. Another modern thinker, philosopher Luciano Floridi, calls the whole environment the infosphere. He says that the infosphere is a space where data and human life mix together. Floridi writes, "Our lives are now inseparable from the flow of information that surrounds us." In his view, existence is no longer just about the body in a room, but also about the bits of data that travel through networks. The idea that a person can be partly a collection of bytes is not a metaphor for Floridi. It is a literal claim about what it means to be alive today. These ideas lead to a central argument, that digital life adds a new layer to what it means to exist. The argument can be broken down into three parts. First, digital actions create real effects. A tweet that goes viral can cause a company to change a policy, or a live stream can raise money for a charity. Those outcomes are tangible, even though they began as bits on a screen. Second, digital identities shape self-understanding. When someone chooses a username, a profile picture, and a set of interests, they are performing a kind of self-construction that feels as authentic as choosing clothes for a day out. Third, the feeling of community that forms in online groups can be as strong as the feeling of belonging to a neighborhood. People who meet through a forum for hobbyists often speak about the same sense of kinship they feel when they meet at a local club. To see this argument in action, imagine a teenager named Maya who posts a short video of herself playing the piano. The video receives many likes and comments praising her skill. Maya feels a rush of pride that spreads through her chest. She tells her mother that the online applause makes her feel seen. In this moment, the digital response has become part of Maya's sense of self. The applause is not just a number. It is a signal that her talent matters to other people, even if those people are strangers behind screens. Contrast that with a different scene. Carlos, a senior manager, has a weekly meeting with his team that used to happen in a conference room. After the office switched to a video call platform, the meetings moved to a grid of squares on a screen. Carlos notices that after each meeting he feels a lingering emptiness, as if something important was missing. He misses the brief moments when a colleague would smile across the table, or when a joke would break the tension. The lack of physical presence leaves Carlos with a sense that the meeting was less real, even though the same topics were covered and the same decisions were made. These two cases illustrate how digital experiences can both boost and diminish the feeling of being. The first case shows how a digital affirmation can become part of personal identity. The second case shows how the absence of face-to-face contact can make a situation feel incomplete. Both are real, and both point to the larger puzzle of existence in a digital age. Not everyone agrees that digital life adds a genuine layer to existence. One counter-argument, often voiced by critics of technology, is that the digital world is simply an extension of real life, not a separate realm. They claim that a post, a game, or a video call is just a tool that people use, and that the core of existence remains unchanged. According to this view, the screen is a window, not a new room. The window can be opened or closed, but the house behind it stays the same. Proponents of this stance often quote the ancient philosopher Aristotle, who said, "Man is by nature a social animal." They argue that social nature does not depend on the medium. Whether people talk in a market or on a forum, they are still social beings. A second counter-argument comes from those who think that digital distractions pull people away from a deeper, more authentic existence. They point to the way constant notifications can fragment attention, making it hard to sit quietly with one's thoughts. This line of thinking is echoed by Nicholas Carr, who wrote, "The brain is being rewired by the internet." Carr suggests that the habit of jumping from one link to another reduces the ability to engage in sustained reflection, which is essential for understanding one's place in the world. From this perspective, the digital age threatens the very practice of philosophy, which relies on quiet contemplation. Both counter-arguments raise important concerns. The first reminds us that tools do not magically create new realities. They shape, but do not replace the human core. The second warns that the speed and volume of digital information can overwhelm the mind, making it harder to find meaning. The debate continues, and each side brings evidence from everyday life. Real applications of these ideas can be seen in mental health practices. Therapists now use online platforms to reach patients who cannot travel to a clinic. A video session can allow a person to talk about anxiety while sitting at home, feeling safe. The digital setting becomes part of the therapeutic space, and the sense of being heard is just as strong as in a traditional office. At the same time, researchers have found that heavy social media use can increase feelings of loneliness, especially when users compare their lives to the polished highlights they see on others' feeds. These findings show that digital tools can both support and undermine well-being, depending on how they are used. Another practical example comes from education. A teacher may create a virtual classroom where each student has an avatar that raises a hand to ask questions. The avatar gives shy students a way to participate without the fear of speaking aloud. In this setting, the digital representation becomes a bridge to real learning. Yet, some educators worry that students who spend most of their time behind avatars may miss out on developing strong verbal communication skills. The balance between digital support and real-world practice is still being worked out. Modern interpretations of existence in a digital age often borrow from older philosophical ideas, but give them a new spin. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger once warned that technology could turn people into standing reserve, meaning that humans might start seeing each other as resources to be used. In today's language, this could be read as treating friends as followers, or treating data as a commodity. Heidegger's warning feels relevant when platforms sell user data to advertisers. The idea that a person's digital trace can be bought and sold shows how technology can change the value of a human life. At the same time, existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre argued that people create meaning through choices. In a digital world, each click, each post, each comment becomes a choice that shapes one's story. Sartre wrote, "We are our choices. When a person decides to share a personal photo, they are choosing to reveal a piece of themselves to the world. That act can be seen as an act of authenticity, even if it happens behind a screen." The digital realm thus becomes another stage on which people can act freely or be forced into patterns by algorithms. Analogies help to make these ideas clearer. Think of a screen as a window. A window lets light in, shows a view, and can be opened to let fresh air in. But a window also separates the inside from the outside. When a person looks through a window, they can see a garden, but they cannot touch the flowers without stepping outside. In the same way, a digital interaction can show a person many ideas and connections, but it may lack the tactile sense of a handshake or the smell of a coffee shop. The window metaphor captures both the gift and the limitation of digital life. Another analogy compares an avatar to a mask at a costume party. A mask hides the face, letting the wearer play a role. The wearer may feel freer to act because the mask protects them from judgment. At the same time, the mask can hide true feelings, making it harder for others to read the person's emotions. In online spaces, avatars let users experiment with identity, but they can also create distance between the real self and the presented self. The mask analogy helps explain why some people feel more confident online, while others feel a sense of loss when the mask comes off. Historical anecdotes reinforce the pattern of new media reshaping existence. When Gutenberg's press first spread the Bible in the vernacular, many people felt a new sense of personal connection to the divine. Before the press, reading the Bible required a priest's mediation. The printed word gave individuals a direct line to sacred text, changing the way they understood their relationship to God and to society. This shift mirrors today's shift from face-to-face conversation to text-based chat, where people feel a direct line to distant friends without an intermediary. A second anecdote comes from the early days of video games. In the late 1970s, a young programmer named Nolan Bushnell created Pong, a simple table tennis game that people could play on a screen. Players discovered that they could feel excitement, frustration, and triumph while moving a joystick. The emotions were real, even though the ball on the screen was just a line of light. The experience showed that digital play could produce genuine feelings, challenging the belief that only physical activities mattered for a full life. That lesson still matters when people today feel real joy from a high score or a well-designed virtual world. Quotes from primary sources give voice to the thinkers discussed. Sherry Turkle said, "Technology does not just change what we do, it changes who we are." Luciano Floridi wrote, "The digital is not a separate world. It is woven into the fabric of our lives." Heidegger warned, "The danger is that the essence of technology will become a hidden force that shapes us without our awareness." These sentences, spoken in their own words, help to anchor the discussion in the original ideas. The modern digital age also raises questions about authenticity. When a person curates a profile that shows only happy moments, they may feel pressure to live up to that image. The pressure can lead to a feeling of alienation, as the real daily routine does not match the online highlight reel. This mismatch can cause a sense of being unreal, a feeling that the self is split between two worlds. On the other hand, some people find that the ability to edit and present themselves gives them the chance to experiment with identity in a safe space. They may try out a new hobby, a new style, or a new way of speaking online before bringing it into the physical world. The question of whether digital life counts as real life also appears in legal contexts. Courts have begun to recognize that online harassment can cause real emotional harm, and that digital contracts are binding. When a judge says, "The damage caused by a hateful tweet is as serious as a verbal insult in person," the law treats the digital act as a genuine part of existence. This legal recognition adds weight to the argument that digital experiences are not merely virtual play, but have real consequences. In the realm of art, creators now use virtual reality to build immersive environments that people can walk through with headsets. An artist can design a forest that feels as if it is breathing, even though the trees are made of pixels. Visitors report feeling awe, calm, or even fear, just as they would in a real forest. The emotional response shows that the mind does not always distinguish between a painted landscape and a digital one. The feeling of being present in a virtual world demonstrates that existence can extend beyond physical boundaries. The digital age also reshapes how people think about mortality. Some people create digital memorials where friends can leave messages for a loved one who has passed away. The messages appear on a screen, and the living can read them as if the person was still speaking. This practice suggests that the digital record can keep a part of a person alive beyond the body. At the same time, philosophers warn that relying on digital memory may cause people to forget the importance of physical rituals, like gathering around a gravesite. The balance between digital remembrance and physical mourning is still being explored. A final modern thinker, Jaron Lanier, calls attention to the way large platforms treat users as data points. He writes, "When you are reduced to a number, you lose the sense that you are a whole person." Lanier's warning aligns with the earlier concern that technology can turn humans into resources. It also ties back to the earlier example of Maya's pride after a post. If Maya's self-esteem depends only on the number of likes, the feeling may be fragile, shifting with each algorithm change. The lesson is that digital validation can be powerful, but it should not replace deeper sources of meaning. Putting all these threads together, a picture emerges of existence that is both expanded and challenged by digital tools. Screens act as windows that let light in and keep some things out, Avatars act as masks that protect and conceal. Online communities act as villages that can be as supportive as a neighborhood, yet also as distant as a city on a map. The printing press and the first video game arcade show that each new medium has once sparked a debate about what it means to be human. Today's debate centers on whether the digital layer is a new room in the house of existence, a window that changes the view, or a distraction that pulls attention away from the core of being. The answer may not be a single word. It may lie in how each person balances the digital with the physical. It may lie in how societies set rules that protect the mind from overload while still allowing the benefits of connection. It may lie in how thinkers keep asking, what does it mean to be? As technology keeps changing the stage on which that question is performed. The story of existence in a digital age is still being written. One post, one video, one conversation at a time. The gentle narrator hopes that listeners will keep watching the screen, but also keep looking up, so that the full picture of being can be seen in both light and shadow. People have lived with big questions since the first fire crackled in a cave. The question of why we are here, what matters, and how to act has never stopped. In daily life, most people do not sit in a library and read long treatises. They find small ways to keep the questions from overwhelming them. The ways they cope can be as simple as a quiet moment in the morning or as communal as a circle of shared stories at night. This part of the video looks at those habits, the ideas behind them, the doubts that critics raise, and the real stories that show how they work. One of the most common habits is a short morning reflection. In this practice, a person wakes up, takes a few breaths, and asks a gentle question. What will I choose to focus on today? The person may note a word on a piece of paper, such as hope, kindness, or curiosity. Then they spend a minute thinking about how that word could guide their actions. This habit does not try to answer the big questions. It only asks for a small direction. By setting a tiny intention, the mind feels less lost. The habit can be done while brushing teeth, while making coffee, or while looking out the window. The key is that it is brief and repeated each day. Over time, the habit builds a sense that the day has a purpose, even if the larger purpose is still a mystery. Another everyday practice is a shared story circle. In many cultures, people gather in the evening to tell stories. The circle can be as small as 3 friends sitting on a porch, or as large as a whole village under a sky full of stars. Each person tells a short tale about something that happened, a memory, or a lesson they learned. The stories do not have to be grand. A simple account of a child's first bike ride, or a neighbor's garden blooming, can become a moment of connection. When people listen, they see that others also wrestle with meaning, loss, and joy. The shared experience makes the existential weight feel lighter. The circle also creates a rhythm, a time to speak, a time to listen, a time to reflect together. Both habits are rooted in mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention to what is happening in the present without judging it. In the morning reflection, the mind stays on the breath and the chosen word. In the story circle, the mind stays on the speaker and the emotions that rise. Mindfulness does not try to solve the question of why we exist. It simply allows the mind to sit with the question without panic. By staying present, the mind can see that the question is part of life, not a monster that must be slain. Community also plays a big role. Humans are wired to belong to groups. When a person feels that others share the same doubts, the feeling of isolation fades. The story circle is a perfect example of community in action. In a village in the highlands of Peru, elders gather children each night around a fire. They tell tales of the mountain spirits, of ancestors who walked the same paths, and of the seasons that change. The children learn that the world is bigger than their own worries, yet also that they are part of a long line of people who ask the same questions. The practice has been passed down for generations, the elders say. When the night is dark, the stories are the light that keeps us from wandering alone. The quote captures the power of shared narrative to soothe existential anxiety. In a modern setting, a therapist named Dr. Maya Patel works with clients who feel paralyzed by questions of purpose. One of her clients, a middle-aged accountant named Luis, came in saying that he felt stuck in a loop of meaninglessness. Dr. Patel introduced a simple habit. Each evening, Luis writes a short note about one thing he did that day that felt real. It could be a smile he gave a stranger, a problem he solved at work, or a moment he listened to his daughter's song. After a few weeks, Luis reported that the habit gave him a sense of continuity. He said, "I can see that I am making tiny marks, even if I do not know the whole picture." Dr. Patel's case study shows how a tiny daily habit can turn a vague dread into a series of concrete moments. It also shows that coping does not require grand philosophical answers, only small, repeatable actions. Not everyone agrees that coping habits are helpful. Some critics argue that any form of coping is simply denial. They claim that by focusing on small rituals, people avoid facing the true depth of existential dread. In their view, the habit becomes a mask that hides the question instead of confronting it. They say that denial can lead to a shallow life, where the person never asks the hard questions at all. This criticism is often voiced by philosophers who value radical honesty. They point to the ancient Greek idea of adia, which means truth. They argue that truth requires looking straight at the abyss, not turning away with a comforting story. Another line of criticism says that coping is essential for mental health, and that it should not be dismissed as denial. From this side, psychologists note that the human brain cannot sustain constant high-level anxiety. They argue that habits like morning reflection and story circles provide the brain with safe spaces to process big ideas. In this view, coping is not avoidance, but a necessary step toward integration. The mind can gradually build tolerance for uncertainty when it is given moments of calm. This perspective is supported by research on resilience, which shows that people who have regular reflective practices bounce back faster from stress. The research also shows that community support reduces the risk of depression. Both sides have points. The denial view warns against hiding behind rituals. The mental health view warns against ignoring the need for safe spaces. The balance lies in using habits as a bridge, not as a wall. When a person uses a morning reflection, they can also set aside time later in the week to read a challenging text, to discuss a tough idea, or to write about a fear. The habit becomes a stepping stone, not an end. Historical anecdotes illustrate how people have used similar practices for centuries. In medieval Europe, monks followed a daily schedule called the liturgy of the hours. They prayed, read, and meditated at set times: sunrise, midday, sunset, and night. The routine gave them a rhythm that kept existential worries in check. The monks would say, "In the silence of the chapel, the soul finds its own answer." The quote shows how routine can become a container for deep thought. In ancient China, scholars practiced quiet sitting, jingzuo. They would sit in a garden, watch the wind move the leaves, and let thoughts come and go without clinging. The practice was not about solving the meaning of life, but about learning to sit with the question. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi wrote, "The butterfly dreaming of being a man is no more real than the man dreaming of being a butterfly." This line reminds listeners that reality and meaning can shift like a dream, and that calm observation helps one stay grounded. Modern psychology also offers analogies that make the ideas clear. Think of the mind as a lake. When a storm of thoughts hits, the surface ripples wildly. A habit, like morning reflection, is a small stone placed gently in the lake. The stone creates a calm ripple that spreads outward, smoothing the larger waves. The story circle is like a group of stones dropped together, creating a pattern that the whole lake can see. The pattern helps the water settle into a new shape, showing that collective sharing reshapes the mind surface. Another analogy compares coping to a pair of shoes. If a person walks barefoot on a rocky path, each step hurts. The big questions are the rocks. A simple habit, like a morning note, is a soft sole that cushions each step. A community story circle is a sturdy pair of boots that protect both feet. The shoes do not remove the rocks, but they let the traveler keep moving without injury. The traveler can later decide whether to change the path or keep walking. Real applications of these habits appear in many places. In schools, teachers have begun a thought of the day routine. Each morning, a teacher writes a question on the board, such as, "What does it mean to be brave?" Students spend a few minutes writing a short answer. The exercise does not aim to produce a final answer, but to give students a safe space to think about big ideas. The practice has been linked to higher engagement and lower anxiety in classrooms. In workplaces, some companies hold a weekly story hour. Employees gather for 15 minutes to share a personal story that mattered to them that week. The stories can be about a challenge at home, a small success, or a moment of gratitude. The practice builds trust, reduces feelings of isolation, and gives workers a way to process stress. Studies show that employees who participate in such circles report higher job satisfaction. The two counter-arguments mentioned earlier can be illustrated with everyday examples. Imagine a person named Maya who decides to do a morning reflection every day. She tells herself that the habit helps her stay calm. A friend, Sam, worries that Maya is simply covering up the fact that she feels empty. Sam says, "If Maya never looks at the deeper question, she might never grow." That is the denial argument. On the other hand, Maya's therapist, Dr. Patel, argues that the habit is vital for Maya's mental health. Dr. Patel notes, "The habit gives Maya a place to pause, which reduces her panic attacks." That is the mental health argument. Both viewpoints are valid, and the story shows how the same habit can be seen in two different lights. The village tradition of night storytelling offers a vivid picture of how community can turn existential worry into shared meaning. In the village of Kashi, located on a riverbank in India, the elders gather every full moon. They sit on a low platform, light a lamp, and invite anyone to speak. One night, a young farmer named Arjun stood up and spoke of a drought that had threatened his fields. He said, "I feared that the river would leave us, that our children would have no water." As he spoke, the elders listened and then offered a story of an ancient king who faced a similar drought and prayed to the river spirit. The story ended with the river returning and the king's people learning to store water wisely. Arjun felt a sense of relief. He realized his fear was part of a larger pattern that many had faced before. The night ended with laughter and a song about rain. The ritual turned a personal dread into a communal lesson, showing how shared narrative can transform anxiety into hope. In the modern therapist's case study, Dr. Patel also used a group story circle in her practice. She invited a small group of clients to meet once a month for a meaning circle. Each person brought a short story about a moment when they felt a sense of purpose. One client, a nurse named Elena, spoke of a night when she held a newborn's hand and felt a surge of love. Another client, a retired carpenter named Tom, described the feeling of carving a wooden chair that fit perfectly. As each story was told, the group listened without judgment. The atmosphere was calm, and the stories created a web of connection. Over 6 months, participants reported lower scores on measures of existential anxiety. The case study demonstrates how a simple shared practice can have measurable benefits. Quotes from primary sources add depth to the discussion. Albert Camus, a writer who wrote about the absurd, said, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." This line reminds listeners that the effort to cope, even without a final answer, can be meaningful. Another quote comes from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. "When you love someone, the best thing you can give them is your presence." The quote ties into the idea that being present in a story circle is a gift both to oneself and to others. Both quotes are short, clear, and easy to remember. To bring the ideas together, imagine a day in the life of a person named Aisha. She wakes up, sits on the edge of her bed, and breathes slowly. She thinks of the word balance and writes it on a sticky note. She carries that note into her day, reminding herself to pause when stress rises. In the evening, she joins her neighbors in the courtyard. They sit in a circle, each sharing a small story. Aisha tells of a moment when a child thanked her for sharing a snack. The group smiles, and the night feels warm. Aisha goes to sleep feeling that the big questions are still there, but they are not crushing. She has tools, a quiet habit, and a community to hold them. The habits discussed are not magical solutions. They are simple tools that help the mind stay steady. The morning reflection gives a personal anchor. The story circle offers a shared anchor. Together they create a rhythm that can make existential questions feel less like a storm and more like a wind that passes over a calm sea. The counter-arguments remind that any tool can be misused. If a person uses the habits to hide, they may never grow. If a person uses them to protect their mind, they can build resilience. The historical anecdotes show that people have used similar tools for centuries, from monks to farmers. The modern examples show that the tools still work today in classrooms, offices, and therapy rooms. In the end, the key is balance. A person can hold a candle of daily reflection while also stepping into the darkness of a big question now and then. The candle does not erase the dark, but it gives a place to stand. The story circle does not answer the question of why we exist, but it reminds each person that they are not alone in asking. The practice of coping, when done with awareness, becomes a bridge between the everyday and the profound. It offers a way to live with existential questions without being swallowed by them. The video can end with a gentle reminder. A voice can say, "Life is full of questions that may never be fully answered. Yet each morning, each story shared, each breath taken in the present can become a small answer, a small comfort, a small step forward." The journey is not about finding a final answer, but about learning to walk with the question. This closing ties together the habits, the community, the counter-arguments, and the real stories, leaving the listener with a calm sense that coping is both a practice and a path. The calm narrator can pause, let the words settle, and let the listener feel the quiet space that the habits create. The final image can be of a sunrise over a quiet lake, the water still, the sky bright, and the viewer feeling ready to meet the day with a simple word and a shared story.